In our family, there are 3 sisters, and as the eldest sister, I have a particularly close relationship with the youngest sister. Over time, the bond between our children also became deep. My younger sister was the first among us to get married. Regrettably, she suffered an unfortunate miscarriage 2 years ago due to poor fetal development. After that, we almost simultaneously welcomed our own children. However, my sister's child was physically weaker and smaller in size compared to other children of the same age. When the children were around 2 to 3 years old, a series of peculiar events started to occur. My sister often dreamt about children she did not recognize playing with our children. Her daughter, who was skinnier and weaker compared to girls her age, often fell over, so we initially thought she had developmental delay and even had checked. But then, one day, while she was holding her daughter on her lap while using her phone, she suddenly felt a push, and her child mysteriously fell to the ground. Once the child got up, she casually said,
"Mom, you hold it."
And then went to the living room to play. Later, during a family trip to Alishan, my sister's child suddenly had an asthma attack. An elderly forest ranger insisted we immediately descend the mountain, stating that our aura was not good. That night, in the hospital, my sister's daughter was put on a children's oxygen mask. Strangely enough, the child's blood oxygen level was normal when the lights were on. But as soon as the lights were switched off, her blood oxygen level would plummet, causing my sister to lose sleep. They were unable to finish their week-long trip as planned, so they decided to return to Wanhua to meet with my daughter. That night, at 3 a.m., a pizza machine toy in the children's toy area suddenly started to sing, "I like pizza. I like cooking." This scared me. The next day, I thoroughly inspected all toy sound settings, but that night, the same toy started singing the pizza song again. This time, my daughter was awakened, her cry shrill. On the 3rd night, the pizza machine sang again, and the child's cry was even louder and more distressing. She was pointing to the toy area and kept repeating, "There, there." The next day, we decided to take the children to the temple for a prayer and discarded the pizza machine toy. My sister also sent me a photo of them at the Alishan rest station. The sunlight in the photo was bright but overly dazzling that their faces became blurred in the photo. It had a penetrating feel to it. They also went to pray and consulted the deity and learned that an unborn child was following them, but there was no malicious intent. And my daughter's crying at night was simply because she wanted to play with the toy. Not long after, a colleague told me that he had a toy to give to our daughter, and the next day, he brought exactly the same pizza machine toy. I don't know whether this is a coincidence or... Anyhow, it was an unsettling experience for my sister and me. First story occurred a few years ago when I was newly pregnant. Although I don't have psychic abilities, my mentor told me I have a weak constitution. This meant that while I couldn't see spirits, I was easily affected by them. I remember it was an ordinary morning when I went out for breakfast with my family. On the way, my mom drove the car to a gas station near our home. Upon arrival, she got off to refuel the car, and my sister went to pick out some snacks. Being pregnant, I didn't want to leave the car and be overwhelmed by the scent of gasoline, so I stayed inside alone. A few seconds after my family left the car, I, sitting in the passenger seat, suddenly felt a pressure on the back seat, as if someone had joined me in the car. I didn't hear the door open, but I still instinctively looked into the back seat to find, unsurprisingly, no one there. I wondered, that's odd. No one's around, and it didn't feel like anyone bumped into the car either. Why is it feeling like the car is being pushed down? Confused, I took a glance at the surroundings and convinced myself that perhaps I was just imagining things. That night, as I was relaxing in bed with my smartphone after a bath, I suddenly felt the ambience around me took a sinister turn. I sat up, leaning against my pillow, and looked around the room. That's when it happened. I heard someone whispering beside my ear from behind me. You might not know it, but have you seen the Korean horror movie, Ganjam Haunted Asylum? In the movie, there was a girl who, after being possessed by a spirit, spoke in a language that wasn't human. It was a jumbled speech delivered at a startling speed, incredibly terrifying. Now, I heard a similar language that didn't belong to humans, a rapid speech, and it was a girl talking. Upon hearing that, I felt a chill running down my spine, and my entire body was breaking into a cold sweat. I was terrified. I was the only one in the room at the time. I had no idea what to do. This was the first time I'd been so close to something non-human. Since I was sitting in bed, my back against the pillow and the head of the bed against the wall, I thought about the entity and wondered, how could anything possibly be behind me at the moment? With that thought, I slowly turned my head to look at my wardrobe. The material of my wardrobe had a reflective surface, in which I saw a ghostly woman sitting on my shoulder. With her head bowed, she was whispering into my ear. The moment I saw this, I became paralyzed, unable to move a muscle. At this very moment, my mother seemed to sense something. She opened my room door and asked me whether I was okay. The moment my mom opened the door, I found myself being able to move again. I told her about the incident. That night, I moved to my mom's room for the night since my dad and my husband were not home. The next day, which was the weekend, my mother took me to one of her friends, who was a spiritual mentor. I explained to the mentor about my experience. The mentor said, during pregnancy, one's body is more vulnerable to attract unfavorable entities. The yang energy of the baby in your belly is very potent, so the spirit was simply attracted to you and means you no harm. Don't worry, it left you last night. I felt a lot more at ease after hearing what the mentor had to say. The second tale involves the most terrifying encounter in my life. Several years after I had my child, we moved to a new home in a 35-story building with 2 below-ground parking floors. While equipped with comprehensive facilities, this building was notorious for its malfunctioning elevator, frequently trapping people mid-ride. The elevator issue, a major headache for the residents, emerges in this tale, perhaps foretelling what was coming next. A strange incident occurred on the day we moved in. My sister and I took the elevator to pick up some delivered food. We pressed the button for the ground floor, and the elevator started descending slowly. Suddenly, we noticed the elevator skipped the ground floor and kept going, until it reached the below-ground parking floors. As we wondered what was happening, the elevator doors sluggishly opened. The underground parking level was not fully furnished at that time, nor were the lights installed. As the elevator doors opened, we were greeted by utter darkness, with an exit faintly lit by green light. Both of us got a fright, but thankfully, the elevator doors closed quickly. We figured it was just a glitch, so we didn't bother too much about it. A few days after settling into our new home, however, a significant incident occurred one late night at around 4 a.m. as I was burning the midnight oil for work. Our building's stairwell doors had rather loud latches, and at one point, I heard a loud bang. I thought someone had slammed the stairwell door, and I thought to myself, "It's so late. Aren't they afraid of disturbing others?" The next morning, I went out to buy some household necessities. My parking spot was on the second basement level. Upon returning, I called the elevator from the parking area. Soon, the elevator arrived. It was empty. I stepped inside, pressed the button for my floor, and stood in a corner, waiting for the elevator door to close. As the door started shutting, a sudden bang echoed, as if something was stuck. The door jolted and began to slide open again. I looked outside, but saw no one entering. I stayed in my corner, waiting for the doors to close once more. Just as the doors were about to shut fully, there was another bang. The doors jolted and slid open again, but there was no person or object in sight. This unusual occurrence left me petrified. Staring at the vacant elevator entrance, I was too terrified to move or press the close button. I held my breath, hoping the doors would shut properly on the next try. Finally, on the next try, the doors managed to close fully. As soon as the elevator arrived at my floor, I scurried out as fast as I could. Back home, my family saw me panting heavily and asked me what happened. Just as I was about to recount my eerie experience, they interrupted.
"Did you know that someone jumped off our building last night?"
I replied in shock. "What?" They continued, "Yes, it happened between 3 and 4 a.m. Someone heard a loud bang and woke up. And looking over to the 7th floor, they saw the body lying in the children's play area. That's when they immediately called the police. It wasn't until then that I realized the bang I heard when I was working late was not from the door of the staircase, but from the person deciding to end his life. The very elevator I had ridden was the one used by medical personnel when they transported the deceased downstairs. Could it be that the object the elevator doors had struck was the departed spirit trying to enter from outside? Back when I was just over 7 years old, due to some circumstances, I had a supernatural sensibility that was extremely strong for a period of time during my youth. However, this perceptiveness disappeared as I gradually grew up. My old house was near the mayor's mansion of Kaohsiung City, which is located in southern Taiwan, a 2-story townhouse. After so many years, that place has long since been rebuilt. According to my father, the area around my old house used to be fish ponds much earlier on. Thus, our old house was built after the fish ponds were filled in. Between our old house and the neighboring house, there was a narrow but very long and deep fire lane. The fire lane was very old, and from what I can remember, I've hardly ever seen anyone walk through there. The households on both sides of the fire lane tacitly locked the back doors leading to the fire lane. Once our back door was opened, it led directly to the fire lane. Strangely, my grandmother always stacked a pile of miscellaneous items at the back door. I lived there for 8 years and never once saw her open that door. Out of curiosity, I once asked her,
Grandma, why is this door never opened?
but she always avoided saying too much, just telling me, no reason, just keep your distance. I said,
Grandma, what's the reason? I want to open and have a look.
angry, she said, when I say no, I mean no. Why don't you listen? Whenever we talked about the back door, my grandma always seemed to be unwilling to say much. For a 7 or 8-year-old child, the areas where adults strictly forbid them from going undeniably appear as mysterious realms with irresistible attraction. I was quite close with the older girl next door at that time, so I ran to ask her out of curiosity, Annie, did you know there's a fire lane behind our house? Annie said, I don't know. What about it? I answered her in surprise.
Really? Haven't you been there either? Every time I mention wanting to open the back door to take a look, my grandma would scold me fiercely. Why don't we go and explore together? What do you say?
Annie replied, sure. So we chatted along the way. But when we got to the entrance of the fire lane, we found that it was locked as well. Through the gaps, we saw plenty of cats inside. At that moment, my supernatural radar suddenly became active. I felt a chill down my spine, goosebumps spreading all over my body. At that time, I was often disturbed by some strange things. So whenever I sensed something abnormal, I would get extremely scared. At the entrance of the fire lane, I inexplicably began to feel scared and decided to back down. Shivering, I said, Annie, let's go. The neighbor's older sister asked me with a puzzled look. What's wrong? I said quietly.
I feel scared. Let's go home. Hurry.
And so, our adventure in the fire lane ended right at the sealed entrance. Sometime later, I encountered a terrifying incident in my room on the first floor. As a child, I was scared to sleep alone, so I'd always go to sleep with my grandma. I slept and studied in that room. My grandma's room was on the ground floor, and there was a frosted glass window facing the firewall. I have a particularly vivid memory of one occasion because it was a day of torrential rain. The rain was heavy, like during a typhoon. It was super scary. Beyond the netted window, there's a welded iron window. On that night, I was reading with my desk facing the window. As I was reading, suddenly, a large black hand slammed directly onto the frosted glass. The entire hand was plastered on the glass, with the palm lines clearly visible. I was extremely confused. How did this hand manage to reach through the screen and the iron window to touch the glass? I was staring at the hand. It was really large, with a milky white palm and dark edges. It was raining heavily outside, and since the windows were closed, I couldn't see outside. However, my sixth sense told me that it belonged to a girl. At that moment, I just kept staring at the hand. Initially, it was only pressed against the glass, motionless. Suddenly, it began to hit the glass. Bang, 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 bang. The entire window vibrated from the pounding, as if it would shatter the next second. I was terrified and erupted in tears, for I knew it wasn't human. Sobbing uncontrollably, I ran to find my grandma and cried out, "Grandma, ah, there's something outside my window." My grandma responded calmly, "What thing? Children shouldn't talk nonsense." Seeing that she didn't believe me, I kept trying to convince her. "It's true, Grandma. There's a hand outside my window." But no matter how much I tried, Grandma didn't believe me. She only told me to stop talking nonsense, scolded me, and told me to return to my room. When I got back to my room, the hand had disappeared. There were no traces of being hit on either the glass or the screen. I was terrified that night, but thankfully, the hand never returned. From that incident, I realized that if the frequency matches, spiritual entities can actually materialize and potentially harm people. But if it wasn't a ghost, think about it. A woman in the midst of a stormy night, standing inside a sealed fire lane, frantically pounding on a window. That's quite a surreal scene as well.
This female student inherently has the ability to see ghosts on a particular night. She and her 3 classmates felt bored and went to an empty classroom in their elementary school. At that time, someone proposed to play a game called Four Corners. In this game, first of all, 4 people are required to each stand in a corner of the room. The room must be kept in complete darkness. No lights can be turned on. The first person moves forward and goes to the position of the second person, then taps the shoulder of the second person. Then, the first person will stand in the position of the second person. Next, it's the turn of the second person to go directly to the position of the third person, tap the shoulder, and so on like this. So, in the end, everyone will move forward 1 spot and meet the person in that corner, except for the 4th moving person. He will move to the original position of the first person, and the position of the first person should be empty, with no one there. And my classmate, she happened to be the 4th person. Unexpectedly, when she walked back to the position of the first player, it was very strange. She encountered a person. This person was all wet because she was facing his back, so she didn't see the face of the wet person. Theoretically, in her current first base position, there should be no one. Who is this extra wet person? She suddenly realized there was an extra person, so she shouted out loud, "Hey, everyone, I think we should leave." So they all hurried to leave. She only shared up until this point and did not share anything further with us. Only later, in a talk show, from a ghost story by a celebrity shared, I learned that this was actually a ritual for summoning ghosts. The second is when this classmate was studying in Xiaoliaokyu. There were graves in their school. One morning, when she was cleaning in the school, and suddenly saw a hand, and that hand was even making the movement of pulling at her clothes. She felt very scared at the moment. Unconsciously, she followed it to the grave in the school, and when she got to the location of the grave, the hand just disappeared. Just as she was trying to understand the situation, she looked at the grave suddenly. The grave was very messy. Later she seemed to understand something, and ran to tell their class teacher to clean the grave. Because of her constitution, she often encountered this kind of thing since she was a child. She is used to such strange incidents. This was an incident that happened to her friend when he was working at Domino's. He was working in the Niasong area of Kaohsiung at the time. One night he received a call for delivery. The call was from a female customer. As the customer was telling him the pizza flavor and address, he kept hearing an old person's voice making noise, similar to the sound of static. He actually didn't think too much about it. He prepared to deliver the pizza to the customer according to the address on the navigation, but as he rode, He found something wrong. Why was the road getting more and more remote? There were no people in sight. There were even some abandoned houses by the road. He thought to himself, "This is not right. It shouldn't be here." Then he re-entered the address in the navigation. As a result, he found that the address displayed by the navigation for the second time, it was not here at all. In the end, he delivered the pizza to the customer based on the newly entered address, and when he was leaving, he thought about the old man's voice on the phone. Suddenly he asked a question, "Is there a guy in your house?" The female customer looked puzzled and said that only she herself lived in the house. The next day, he found the address of the abandoned house from memory and looked up related information online. Unexpectedly, the abandoned house on that remote path was actually a haunted house. So what was that old man's voice he heard, and why did the navigation guide him to that haunted place? Finally, this is the story of a friend living in Zindian. In May 2014, when she finished her cram school that day, it was already 11 p.m. Her father rode a motorcycle to pick him up that night, and when her father turned a corner, he passed a bus stop sign. Next to the sign was an abandoned basketball court. She suddenly noticed that there seemed to be a child squatting next to the bus stop, and that child was staring straight at her. The child was gray and wearing a diaper. There were blood on his head and body. At that time, she thought she was seeing things and closed her eyes in fear for a moment. Not long after, when she opened her eyes again, she found that the child was still there and still looking at her. Originally, she wanted to take a picture with her mobile phone, but her father rode past quickly. When she got home, she felt a chill down her spine and seemed to be haunted by sleep paralysis that night. The next day, when she passed that road again, she didn't encounter the child because she has a rather powerful inner spirit, so her life has returned to normal afterwards. After that, when she goes through that road at night, she still feels quite creepy.
If you want to see my videos faster, please like and subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates.